Sagst du? Ja, dann klappt das.
Also das weiss überkommt
das
funktioniert.
Ja. Und du sagst jetzt etwas, oder?
Nein,
nein,
ich habe nur einfach für dich.
Du
Sie moderieren.
Ja, genau.
Und wenn Sie werden moderiert, dann tue ich dich einführen.
Sehr gerne,
Weil das ist der letzte Teil, Future.
Ja,
du bist Future.
Völlig klar. Ja. Ich sehe. Schlimm ist der Fangen, ja. Well, it's 4 o'clock. We are starting for the last lecture of session 2, and this lecture will be presented by Professor Leeners. She is deputy head of the clinic of Bruno here in Zurich, but she has been trained in Aachen and made the habilitation in Aachen too. Then she came to Zurich, and now she changed to completely Swiss. And the subject is naturally fascinating. The only subject we didn't have until now, that is sexual health in aging women. A broad subject.
Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I hope I can make your life and those of your patients happier with this lecture. And I had to take exams at the beginning of the week for the new doctors. And there was a young woman who had to question this gynecological patient, 40 years old. And then I heard this doctor asking this actor patient at the age of 40, are you still sexually active? And I was quite astonished because I know that many people think that about elder people, but I found the age of 40 is quite young to assume that there is no more activity. So what is discussed at the background of such a development is often sexual desire. So I decided to start my lecture with sexual desire. And then I went into the internet and tried to find a nice picture to start on female sexual desire. And this is about what you find. So most of the women seem to be not so excited. And I just took the first 7 images I saw. And there seems to be one woman who is interested and who shows some activity to start a sexual contact. So, unfortunately, this meets reality. Independent from age, lack of sexual desire is the main problem in women. And it's followed by orgasm disorder, dyspareunia, and vaginism on point 4. But lack of sexual desire is also number 3 for men. So, I now had then a deeper look on how does this sexual desire develop throughout the lifespan, and this is own data from the Zurich cohort study, so we have really something nice from a representative sample in Switzerland, which I published together with Professor Angst, who's the leader of this study, and he started to investigate about 300 women and 300 men in 1987. And there were altogether 7 waves, different ages, where he asked these groups the question, how would you rate your sexual desire? And he only started these questions at the age of 27, 28. And you see that for women, it remains relatively stable, around 15% of women who told the interviewers that they lack sexual desires. And in men, you have a different development. You have an increase. And as you see here, this stops quite early. If you would prolong this curve, you would see the same development with an increase in the men and relative stability in women. So if you ask these women, why is there lack of sexual desire, you find something very interesting, because this lack only relates to partnership sexuality. So they are not very interested of what happens with their partner, But if you ask questions on masturbation or on general sexual interest, there is no lack of sexual desire at all. And if you discuss with sexual therapists, the reason behind may on the one side be that not all men are so interested that their female partners have fun when having sex. But what we see, what is far more important, is that many women do not know what they like. And if you don't know what you like, you can't tell it to your partner, you can't explain or show it to your partner. And many of these women do not try to find out. And then the next step is that many, especially long-term partnerships, people have difficulties in discussing what they need. It's very hard to tell your partner that, well, my last orgasm, that was 30 years ago, and we've got kind of a problem. So what you can do in your daily business is to support couples in discussing sexual needs. Because what we know very clearly is that if there's sexual satisfaction, there is sexual desire. There's good data showing that it's not age, but it's the duration of the relationship and the energy you put into your sexual life, which creates sexual desire. And what is also very important is that many men and women expect that women would react to visual cues, but women often react to relationship parameters. They like to play with eroticism, seduction, are topics of women. So when we look at German data, we see again that sexual desire is an important problem, here even 25%. And this graph shows you a comparison of women in partnership and single women. And here you see very clearly that there is bigger problems than lack of sexual desire, especially in single women, because here often you have lack of a partner, so there is lack of interest towards these women, lack of sexual activities, and especially lack of tenderness, which is reported by up to 80% of single women in a 50 to 60-year-old group. And this is further emphasized by this which you saw before. In the higher age groups, we've got more women than men. And if all these women would look for a partner of the same age group, they would already have difficulties. But as you all know, most men are orientated towards younger age groups. So there is lack of available partners. And from the point of attraction, this might somehow be understandable. But if you look at the physiology, you see that in both men and women, arousal and excitement and the easiness to approach orgasm decreases with age. So from a physiological point of view, it would fit much better if elder men and elder women would form couples and you would not have such a strong age discrepancy. So let me now come to hormones. As you all know, testosterone is one of the hormones which is discussed intensively in the context of female sexual desire. And here's a nice study where testosterone values were collected from 6 years prior to menopause to 8 years after menopause. And as you see very easily is with menopause, you do not have a strong decrease, so you can't explain any sudden drop of sexual desire by that. And I want to present you some study results here. A study which was published in a very high-class journal where 70 women having surgical menopause received estrogen treatment, partly in combination with testosterone treatment at 2 different doses. And interestingly, these women were asked inclusion questions for study participation, which did not focus on sexual desire, but on sexual activity and satisfaction with sexual contacts. And I think that sexual activity and satisfaction is a very complex issue, so I do not think it's the right entry question for a study on testosterone effect. However, what they did is they used 2 different doses in addition to estradiol and a placebo, all with estradiol. And as you can see here, with the 150 microgram dose, you are close to the normal range. And with the higher dose, you're quite above the normal range, which is a bit difficult, as we do not have any long-term data on what testosterone does on breast cancer risk, on cardiovascular risk, etc. Then if you look at the effect of on sexuality, you can here see from the baseline compared to the placebo, you have a strong increase around 20 points. If you compare this to the reaction for the lower testosterone treatment group, there is hardly any difference here. You see a difference with the higher dose, but if you see the increase from the baseline to placebo and then the next step to the highest dose, the increase by placebo is far stronger than what you achieve with the testosterone treatment. I want to show you a meta-analysis which was published in JSAM quite recently, where they did a summary of all available study to investigate the effect of testosterone on different sexual parameters. And here you see that there is a small but positive effect on all parameters. But I think, again, these studies are biased because often they do not work with a holistic approach, so they do not differentiate between placebo. They do not use any possibilities from sexual medicine therapeutic effects. And I think to clearly investigate an effect of testosterone, you should account for these confounders. What supports this idea is, for example, a study from Kleinplatz, where she investigated couples who rated their sexual life as great sex, and she also discussed with different specialists, and they come to the conclusion that this is the list of factors which really influence the quality of your sexual life. And as you see, it has nothing to do with hormones. It's about presence, how connected you feel with your partners, how easily you can share sexual needs, discussing them and coming close to the partner, how authentic you are. So it's all qualitative partners, and this is what I see in my sexual consultation also, that it's really a minority of women where you can improve the situation just with the hormone, and you're far more effective if you address these issues. So if you want to use testosterone as a therapy, there's no preparation on the Swiss market, which is allowed for this indication. If you want to use something, you have to use, for example, these 3 preparations which are on the market for men, and women need about 1/10 of the doses, so it's always a bit tricky how you adjust that. Viagra for women, is that a solution for lack of sexual desire? As you probably know, it has been, or is a side product of a development of antidepressants. You have to take it on a daily basis. And if you look at the studies, you have about 1 more sexual contact, no increase of sexual desire in about a month to 6 weeks. And on the other hand, you have side effects that you get dizzy, and so it's really a big question whether it's worth taking that. Most women do not appreciate that. Okay. What is very clear is that you can improve the situation, the physiological situation, through application of estrogen. Estrogen is a hormone which is involved very deeply in vaginal health, looking at the superficial layer or at the extracellular matrix, which explains the elasticity of the tissue. It is also involved in the density of muscles and blood vessels, which you need for lubrication, where in association with sexual arousal, the vessels are dilated, and through this dilation, you get more liquid in the inside of the vaginal, and as you can imagine, if due to endogenic effects, you have smaller vessels and a lower quantity of vessel, this will not work adequately. Here, if you have a systemic treatment, this will have this effect, but you can also use local preparations. Here it's advantageous to use estriol, which cannot be seroconverted into estrogens, which would have a negative or potential negative effect on, for example, hormone-dependent tumors. What is another topic is general health. As you all know, with increasing age, there's a variety of symptoms which you could have. Perimenopausal symptoms, we know today that they do not persist only 2-3 years after menopause, but may persist long term, with heat flushes and sleeping disorders. The general training fitness is a topic. We have heard a lot about cardiovascular diseases. Orthopedic diseases may render sexual contacts more difficult. Incontinence is an important topic. Cancer diagnosis have important consequences on sexual performance. But most often it's not the health of the women, but the health of the partners. And here, for erection, also medications have a far stronger effects on the male side than they have on women. And this is why, if you look all together, this is again data from the Zurich cohort study. If you look at women, you have relatively stable numbers of sexual disorders throughout the lifespan, but it's known that in men, certain disorders, especially erectile dysfunction, strongly increase with age. And as a consequence, a couple will a lot more frequently stop sexual activity because of health issues of the male partner than the other way around. So there is also new developments regarding sexual health in older women. For example, there is a strong increase since 2005, triple-fold increase in the use of dating platforms for elder people. There's altogether 39 of these dating platforms who now have started to make special offers for an elder group. To let you have an idea, it's about 43% of men above 40 and about 60% of women above 40 who have tried such a dating platform. The motivations are very different. For men, it's an opportunity to get in contact to more women, to have more opportunities to meet women. And when you ask the motivation in women why they use such a dating platform, it's more that through these platforms they can find more easily a partner meeting their needs, and they can have more control over the dating process. So they can first send mails and answers and really choose whether they want to meet this person or this man in person. Men and women report that there is an age penalty. So if you look how often a male or a female person is, or somebody else is interested in this person, you see that the maximum is, as to expect, around 25-30, and then there is a decrease for both men and women. And what people do to compensate for that is often they report not their real age. They try to show nice photos where they look a bit younger. And interestingly, it's the classical points which make men and women more interesting. They describe this in the text they present on these platforms. And for men, it's socioeconomic status and occupational success. And for women, it's physical appearance and usefulness. And there has been detailed analysis showing that, the way they present their pictures, they support exactly this, very common topics. Okay, I'm dreaming of a situation like this, and I think this is something we all observe, that, now the age of 60 or even 70 corresponds to the age of 50 about 20 years ago, that women and men feel more healthy, that the identities change, that what you do in your free time, how you spend leisure time changes. And I think with the increasing health status of elder postmenopausal women, their roles and how to present themselves will hopefully change as well. And I will close with this slide, which I found very interesting. The beginning of research was a lot about what do women, when, in which circumstances, about numbers. And now research on female sexuality addresses also effects of this sexuality in combination with health. And any studies focusing on whether sexual activity improves your general health is very delicate, because there's always this hen and egg effect, because women who are very healthy will likely engage more often in sexual activity, so that it's difficult to say what is the hen and what is the egg. But I like this study because here it's part of a representative sample in England and Ireland, the ELDER study, where they investigated women between 50 and 89. It's about 7,000 women investigated, or adults investigated in this study. And they had the men and women do 2 different cognitive tests. One where they had to do number sequencing, and another one was word recall to investigate memory and executive function. And they adjusted results for a variety of factors, including physical activity, but also depression, how they rated their health. So at least they could get an idea of the influence of certain confounders. And they found that in men, both cognitive tests, and in women, the recall test was associated with sexual activity. So I hope this is another reason why in the future you would support your patients in creating a fulfilling sexual life. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Brigitte. I think that is a really important subject that is highly underestimated. That will be punished by tarmac too in the future. Now, speaking of accepting its age, there has been a very old study, I think 68, where one of the questions was, does menopause destroy attractivity? You know the study? And in Italy and France, most women said no. In Germany, England, yes. So there are huge cultural differences.
There are.
But another question that is, I think, a real problem for a lot of us, how make a couple that is completely disintegrated to speak again together? What is your trick? They want to stay together as a basic condition, but they do not know.
If they know already they want to stay together,
You have to accept as a basic treatment.
Yeah, because then you can start to discuss what they would need to stay together. I think if they come to see us, then they already did the first step. because they show that their relationship is worth seeking professional help. I think this is something you can all do to help them to discuss. And I think I always experience if you can have the role of a moderator. They know what they want to know from their partner. And you, as a moderator, you can ask questions more freely because you haven't asked them 100 times before and got not the answer you wanted, and you're not in the same boat. And my experience is if they come and they're so motivated, they're very happy if they see that things get forward. They learn about each other, and with each step, it gets a lot easier. But to come and to start it, this is the difficult part.
Yeah. Do you have questions? Yes, Bino.
I agree with you that the role of testosterone has been, by some, probably exaggerated because all of the other things that you mentioned. And I remember more than half a century ago, Robert Greenblatt, who was one of the fathers of reproductive endocrinology, used to put subcutaneous capsules, and he used to put testosterone and estradiol. I mean, this was before everything, almost 60 years ago. And he felt that women were happy, but to my knowledge, he never published anything, which means that he, in the end, didn't find a lot of results. Of course, I don't know about the female Viagra, whether that holds better.
No. I think what most of these studies do not see is when a woman comes and you start discussing about sexuality, so you pay more attention, and then you give some tips aside what you could do. And I think if really you would do a fair study, you would see the problem and then have really a holistic approach where you take any sexual therapeutic possibilities on the one hand, and you have a look at the hormonal situation, and then you put everything together and you can see what you do. It's the same if you look at Viagra for men. Most men take it for a year and then they stop taking it because it's not integrated in improving the sexuality as a total. And sexuality is not just about penile erection or a certain hormone level. It's a lot more complex, and really to improve it, I think you need several factors.
Are there other questions, or is it completely clear? I think we are far away from that, but you can always contact Professor Leeners. Thank you very much.
Past, present, and now the future. This is the last chapter and the last presentation now of this conference. Actually, future, nobody would ask a retired professor to talk about the future. But Professor Martin Birkhäuser, he is a splendid exception. Although he retired and stepped back a couple of years ago from his chairmanship at the Inselspital in Bern, he is still a one of the most active members of the scientific menopausal community, not only in Switzerland, but also worldwide. And he always gives stimulating presentations. He knows much more what's going on than many of the younger colleagues. And that's why he is the man now for this presentation, for this talk. And I want to take already now the opportunity once again to thank you, Martin, for the fruitful collaboration in the preparation and in the organization of this conference. Thank you. And I invite you now for the talk, Menopausal Hormone Therapy, Available Alternatives and Substitutes in Development. Please, Martin.
Thank you, Bruno. It was a real pleasure, as always, to work with you. And as we learned this morning, we have to stimulate our gray cells. So we try to do it. Now the subject you see here on the first slide. But before I go to alternatives and to new substances, I introduced a part one. We need a new thinking. Because very old errors continue to be repeated in even recently updated position statements. The best example is this document here. Primary prevention of chronic disease conditions. You wouldn't expect that, I think, intelligent people are still able to write the sentences you will see now. The first sentence is the excess risk that can be attributed to menopause is uncertain. That is nonsense. We know since the Framingham study that there is increased risk. Already in 1976, it has been shown for CVD. And we know since then, and it has been said today several times, that other diseases, including mood disorder, sexual dysfunction, osteoporosis, CVD, etc., are increased after menopause. The risk to suffer from one of these problems is highly increased. And if you go back to the PEPI trial, we have already confirmation for that in 1995. So this statement here is really wrong. The next error is evidence is limited to determine whether different types of hormone therapy affect its benefit to harm profile or the prevention of chronic conditions. Again, evidence is not limited. Evidence is existing. If you follow the authors of this document, they still think that CEA is equal to E2 and that MPA is equal to all other progestin. We know for about at least 20 years that is not the case. We have strong evidence that estrogens are not identical, E2 and CEA is different, and there's strong evidence that there is no unique progesterone activity, that each substance has a different profile. Error 3 is that they pretend that there is limited evidence to determine whether different doses of hormone therapy have different effects. Again, we know for a long time that there is no unique dosage that can be used for all diseases and for all preventions. If you go to the Women's Health Initiative, the test is just one dose. So this study doesn't give any evidence supporting the lowest effective dose coming from this study. Error 4 is that there is limited evidence to determine whether different modes of delivery have different effects. Again, that is a big mistake to think that all MHT has the same effect on stromal MHT. I cannot imagine how these people here have this idea. Reality, you know them well. It is a huge difference if you use transdermal E2 or per all E2, not only for venous thrombosis and stroke, but for other indications too. And the last big error in this paper here, they pretend that evidence about whether the benefits to harms of MHT vary by age or time since menopause is limited. Again, it is not limited. Has been clearly stated that there is a difference if you start at 51 or if you start at 70. And for that, we have very old evidence. The Nurses' Health Study is not a bad study. It is not RCT, but it's a good study. Then we have DOPS, the Danish study, and we have the recent Eli trial. All confirm that age is very important for the effects and the risks. Again, already the PEPI trial 95 has shown it. And that is during the time when the first steps in the Women's Health Initiative have been taken. So an article like that shouldn't be published anymore. And I think we have to make pass this message to our environment. I do not know what happened to the States with this paper. I hope it will be corrected. Now we are coming to the available alternatives to MHT. You see here the alternatives cited by Jane and Davis. I added some aspects to it. We have the SSRIs or SNRIs. We have clonidine on this table, gabapentin, pregabalin, hypnosis has been mentioned on this table, cognitive behavior therapy, weight loss for obese women, and the stellate ganglion blockade you mentioned before, Pauline, an interesting approach, but a difficult approach. And then the last item cited by Jane and Davis was phytotherapy. I put it in a different way with some pluses and minuses. We have the lifestyle changes. For me, that is the beginning. Cool environment. You have to cool down your apartment if needed. Today, everybody has, I think, a temperature that's too high. Then we have the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. If you go to the literature, and I would say not to the highly specialized literature, you find vitamin D, Dong Quai, and a lot of other products, mostly herbal products. But for all of these, we have no significant difference compared with placebo. Then with acupuncture, we have phytoestrogens, isoflavones included, black cohosh, antidepressants. Then clonidine, in my table, it's quite low in the possibilities because the side effects are important, constipation, insomnia, dry mouth. Gabapentin, pregabalin in the lower part too, again because of the side effects, dizziness, headache, somnolence. The dopamine agonists have been nearly out of use in the last years because of side effects. And the ganglion synapse blockade is low, not because it's bad, it's excellent, but it's difficult. And you need a specialist who's able to do it. We'll discuss only the blue points in some details. Just to give you, as an introduction to behavioral therapy, on this slide, the importance of self-confidence for the symptoms women suffers from after menopause. This study has shown that the higher the self-confidence is, the less you suffer from menopausal symptoms, or put in another way, the better is your quality of life after menopause. Here you have the women with a low self-confidence, here with a high self-confidence. The difference is clearly significant. And that you can correct by behavioral therapies. The cognitive behavioral therapy is, I think, still quite rare on the continent. I think in part for financial reasons. It's not reimbursed mostly by the insurance companies. It is a psychological intervention where you develop strategies to reduce unhelpful thought patterns, and that will improve your responses to stressors. But the CBT protocols should not only focus on vasomotor symptoms, but also depression, anxiety, sleep, and sexual concerns. So it's a broad spectrum. There's a recent study where it has been proven that this therapy, the CBT menopause group in this RCT, has shown that in the active group with the treatment, there is a large reduction in severity of symptoms and in depression symptoms, and a reduction in sleep difficulties too. Whereas in the placebo group, there was no significant decrease. So it is effective. What about acupuncture? It has been compared in this study to applied relaxation. No effect, significant effect. But acupuncture had a significant effect. Both types of official needle insertions and electroacupuncture. There are other studies and reviews too confirming this fact. We did a study in Bern and could show in this study that medium to low symptomatic women had amelioration. Women with severe symptoms had no amelioration. But there has been a publication quite recently where it has been shown that there was no difference between acupuncture and sham acupuncture. Nobody knows why. It's a riddle. Because if you look at these studies or other studies of this type, you find a difference. In this other study, no. So we don't know a lot about acupuncture, in fact, what is going on really. But it is an interesting approach. In the same study, E2 tablets have been put in as a comparison, and of course, there you had the highest effect. There was a Cochrane review on phytoestrogens from 2013, I think the most cited one, and you see the statement is not so optimistic. They come to the conclusion that you have no really evidence-based effect. The studies included 43 RCTs. Only 5 of these 43 yielded data suitable for the inclusion, and all these correct studies have been done with one substance, the promenzil, that is a red clover extract. The global results have been, as I have said before, that you have no real evidence-based effect. Also, there is some amelioration in some women and some studies. But what has to be stressed, the placebo effect in most trials was very high. It went up to minus 59%. So how to find out if the placebo effect is so high, if the active substance is successful or not? What is said in this review too is that benefits from this special group, genistein preparations, is worth to be further investigated. It wasn't said for all other substances that have been looked at. Here the data for red clover. No significant difference overall. But nevertheless, in another part of the resume, he comes to the conclusion that it can be tried. What about soy isoflavones, effect on hot flushes? We thought that the efficacy of soy isoflavones has been demonstrated in several clinical trials and confirmed in meta-analysis and reviews. That was 3 years after the Lesapé Cochrane review. It has been said in this statement that the effect is independent of the source of the soy isoflavones, but there are some combinations that have been included in most of reviews too, combinations with red clover extracts or other substances, other herbal substances. The effect on bone mineral density has been reviewed quite recently by the group of Abdia. Haji Payman was in this group. They concluded that isoflavones may have beneficial effects on bone health in menopausal women. I think that is too optimistic because the reports about changes in BMD are controversial. And what is more important, there are no fracture data. So for fracture prevention, the use of phytoestrogens demands a regular control by DEXA. Otherwise, you shouldn't do it. Then we have a Cochrane review about black cohosh. That is the cimicifuga racemosa for menopausal symptoms. The conclusion until 2002 was that there was no significant difference between black cohosh and placebo in the frequency of hot flushes or other menopausal complaints. And Leach says there is currently insufficient evidence to support the use of black cohosh. But in the same paragraph, the continuation is there is adequate justification for conducting further studies. The problem of this Cochrane review and all other American reviews is that they mix all species up and all extracts up. They make no difference between racemosa and Asian known ineffective species of cimicifuga. Of course, you cannot find anything. So if we put it together, what is the mistake, the big mistake of this review in 2002? You have the 5 points, use of the wrong species, mainly the Asian species. This species has been shown to be inactive. There has been a huge variability in the compounds selected by certain experts. Then some American drugs use multi-botanical mixtures. You do not know what is really in and which part has which effect. And then, and I think that is the real danger of this review, the sources are not standardized. The extracts are not normalized. I think you cannot use this old review of 2002. We have newer reviews, no Cochrane, but from other sources, for instance, Borelli. Francesca finds a difference between placebo and black cohosh, but only racemosa. And the same for Mola, who states that the effect is higher than placebo in control of osmotic symptoms. So I would say it is a substance we can use. If you go to Guttoso, the last of these reviews, there's a statement that there are 6 well-designed trials with the black cohosh, and these 6 trials following Guttoso demonstrated a clinically meaningful benefit. That are our own data. We had here the placebo group, and here we have the CR group, the Tracemosa group. The difference was significant, but again, only in not severe and medium severe patients, not in severe patients. And then you have some comparisons. Here, black cohosh against conjugated estrogens. That is the placebo group, cibicifuga, racemosa, and conjugated estrogens. That is for major climateric complaints, waking up periods of the night. And you see that cibicifuga and conjugated estrogens have both a positive effect. The difference between the 2 groups is not significant, but the difference of both therapeutic group to placebo is significant. Another study done by Rosella Nappi confirms a significant effect for transdermal estradiol. You have the transdermal estradiol in the black column and the CR group in the blue ones. You see a significant decrease for both. Again, the difference between the basal values and the treatment values is significant, but the difference between the 2 treatment groups, black cohosh and estrogens, is not significant. And this study has been well done. It is a solid study on RCT. But again, it is a standardized extract, not a mixture that is not clearly defined. The last study I found to prove that the black cohosh is an intox substance is a comparative tibolone done in Germany. And in this study, the results showed a similar clinical improvement in both groups. The difference was not significant, and a similar response in the percentage of women who indicated satisfaction for 84 and 85 for the 2 groups. So if you put the knowledge about cibicifuga together, it is not a phytoestrogen and has no estrogenic properties. It has significant beneficial effect on vasomotor symptoms. We have a positive effect on bone remodeling, but no, again, fracture data. We have a non-significant positive effect on the vaginal epithelium. There's no stimulation of endometrium and the breast. The safety profile is good. And we have no negative impact on breast cancer survivor for loss of time. I cannot show you the data. It's a study done in Germany where you had not more relapses in the racemosa group than in the control group. Then we have the big group of SSRIs and SNRIs. What do we know about norepinephrine and hot flushes? We know that norepinephrine plays a major role in thermoregulation. It acts through 2 adrenergic receptors. We have a main metabolite, and this metabolite is higher in symptomatic women than in asymptomatic women. Symptoms, I mean vasomotor symptoms. And this metabolite increases significantly with hot flushes. So it plays a role in the mechanisms of the creation of vasomotor symptoms. The hypothesis of Friedman is that the elevated sympathetic activation acting through this receptor and that is modulated by estrogens plays a role in the initiation of hot flushes. So this article states that menopausal estrogen might be involved in this mechanism going through noradrenaline, and that SSRIs and SNRIs might, for this reason, correct vasomotor symptoms. Here you see a cartoon illustrating what you just said. Estrogens are interfering in the transmission of signals between the inane neurons and the serotonergic neurons to the postsynaptic neuron, and estrogens are influencing the communication of the 2 types of neurons here. If you take estrogens away, then you have a disinhibition of the flux between the 2, and if you substitute it again, you can correct it. And the idea is that if you give the neurotransmitters themselves, you can correct it too. What has been used in menopausal women? we have the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, fluoxetine, paroxetine, sertraline, citalopram. We have one SNRI that is used, venlafaxine, and its derivative desvenlafaxine, not nefazodone. And we have in phase 3, now the data are being analyzed, mirtazapine and esmirtazapine. This substance is not used in women for menopausal indications. If you look at the literature, we have a general agreement that SSRIs and SNRIs reduce the frequency and severity of hot flushes in perimenopause and postmenopause, and that the decrease is significant. It is said that paroxetine is the most effective SSRI, followed by citalopram and escitalopram. Venlafaxine affects as the most effective SNRI. Desvenlafaxine a second option. And it is said too that the treatment choice should be patient-specific for side effects too, and begin with the lowest dose available. These data show the results for paroxetine. I will not show details for the other substances, just an example. If you go to the left, you have an improvement. If you go to the right, you have no improvement. And you see that the final data, collection of final data, has a significant positive effect on vasomotor symptoms. The adverse effect are headaches, dizziness, nausea, fatigue, drowsiness, etc., and constipation. The most important side effect is nausea and dizziness, but it is said that these side effects disappear mostly after the first week of treatment. Now there is one complication. We have the fact that women with a history of breast cancer and taking tamoxifen should avoid SSRIs, which have been shown to interfere with tamoxifen metabolism. Tamoxifen is a prodrug that has to be activated, and this is inhibited. So SNRIs are the safest drug for this population instead of SSRIs. And that means that the first choice, drug of first choice for this special group of women is venlafaxine, desvenlafaxine. But there is another aspect. Exactly this optimal group has been associated with increased blood pressure in some patients. So the patients have to be strictly controlled for unwanted elevation of blood pressure. So if you conclude the chapter interaction between tamoxifen and SSRIs, we can say that for pragmatic reasons already, we should avoid the substances having competition at this enzyme, and that includes not only paroxetine, but fluoxetine, duloxetine, and bupropion. Then sertraline, citalopram, escitalo have a lesser inhibition of this enzyme, but nevertheless, venlafaxine should be preferred, but there is no effect at all. And for women already taking tamoxifen with a known CYP2D6 inhibitor, any change of treatment should be gradual to minimize the risks of withdrawal symptoms and other effects commonly seen if you start again the new treatment with the new substance, that means venlafaxine. Let us now come to the substitutes in development. The first group is treatment of VMS. There we have one hormonal compound, that's the E4 estetrol. One study has just been published, a phase 2 study. We know from earlier data that E4 does not bind to the carrier protein SHBG, that it induces a synthesis in hepatite that is not, that it does not induce a synthesis in hepatocytes cultured in vitro, and that there is no change of the activity of relevant cytochrome P45, related liver enzymes involved in drug metabolism. So if you look at these already known data, it should be quite a safe substance. That is the study published just about 4 weeks ago. 50 women have been included. These women have been randomized in an open label fashion to receive either 2 milligrams of E4 or 2 milligrams of E2 valerate, 10 in each group. And then subsequently, the other 30 women participate in a dose elevation study. You see here the elevation started from 2 to 4 to 20 to 40 milligrams E4. Here the result. You have, if you take the low dose, no effect of ADL, HDL lipids. If you take the 10 milligram dose, and that is a dose corresponding to 2 milligrams of escitalo valerate, you have a small increase. Naturally, higher increase with the high dosages. And again, if you take the 2 milligram E2 valerate and the 10 milligram E4, you have a decrease of LDL cholesterol. The difference between the two was not significant. So there is some effect on lipids. Bone turnover is influenced too. The 2 milligrams, the low dose group had no effect. But if you take 2 milligram E2 valerate, the usual dosage, and 10 milligram E4, you have more or less the same effect on bone turnover. Again, bigger effect for the highest dose. Conclusion for escitalopram. Escitalopram showed dose-independent estrogenic effects on endocrine parameters, bone turnover, and lipids. The effect on triglyceride was small, it has not been shown on the slides, as were the effects on hemostatic variables. And they confirm at the end of discussion that the 10 milligrams of escitalopram are comparable to 2 milligrams of E2 valerate for clinical use. We'll see what happens to coagulation in a bigger study. I'm not quite sure that there will be no effect at all. Then we have a non-hormonal principle linked to the kisspeptides. You see here the principle. We have the kisspeptin signals directly to GnRH. You see it here then. The location of the kisspeptin neurons population is in the hypothalamus, and the place is species-specific. Kisspeptin neurons in the infundibular nucleus, that is in humans, co-express neurokinin B and dynorphin. And from there, you have other neuroreceptors that are activated. So in fact, kisspeptin stimulates secretion of both LH and FSH in human. Also, the effect on the LH is much more marked. And kisspeptins coordinate GnRH and LH positilities. On this basis, some theories have been developed that kisspeptin and the whole chain of regulation of the KNDY neurons and GnRH neurons could be used for treatment of hot flushes in menopausal patients. If you look at the evidence existing today, we know that these NKB neurons are a key link between the endocrine changes of the menopause and vasomotor symptoms. That has been shown for good. The kisspeptin neurokinin B and dynorphin signal system in the hypothalamus is approximate and obligate stimulus to generate secretion. And interesting enough, these neurons are hypertrophied after the menopause. Again, suggesting that there must be a link between this system and menopause and might be symptoms. We know too that neurokinin B signaling is increased in menopausal women, and it has been implicated as an important mediator of hot flushes. So far, the data are safe. There has been one study until now with this substance, that is the code for the substance. It is a neurokinin 3 receptor antagonist. Participants for the study have been healthy women aged 40 to 62 years, so the group we are aiming at. The participants received 4 weeks of this substance in a dose of 40 milligrams, orally given twice daily, and a placebo. They have been randomized to the two groups, placebo or active treatment. The primary endpoint has been the change in hot flush frequency, and this first study confirmed what the hypothesis said. If you give this neurokinin receptor antagonist, you have a significant decrease of heart flush frequency. So I think this substance, this antagonist, will have a future. We do not know when the first, I would say, the first larger phase 3 trials will be available, and we cannot predict when the substance will be available on the market. But I think it is of high interest. Then we have some substitutes for fracture prevention. There have been abundant projects. The calcium sensing receptor agonist has been dropped because it was not effective enough already in phase 2. Odanacatabine, the interesting substance inhibitor of cathepsin C, had a successful phase 3 trial. If you look at the reduction of hip fractures, vertebral fractures, and clinical vertebral fractures, but unfortunately an increased stroke risk. Nobody knows why. But based on this increase in the stroke risk, Merck had announced in last September that the development of this substance will be stopped. That was a huge loss for the company. And the stock market reacted. Then we have romosozumab. That is an ongoing project. It's an anti-sclerostin. It is a monoclonal antibody. We have, as most important study, the FRAME study with about 7,000 postmenopausal women. The first year was blinded. It was a comparison between the active substance and the placebo, and then both groups, the active and the placebo, switched to an addition of denosumab for the second year. Here the results in BMD, lumbar spine, total hip, femoral neck, all sites showed a significant increase. You see here the final values of BMD. Again, a highly promising substance. The first fracture data are available. It is only until now vertebral fractures at 12 and 24 months. You see the significant decrease of the fracture rate at the vertebrals for this substance. If there is no accident, like for the cathepsin, for instance, an increased CVD risk, this substance will be quite soon on the market. Then we have the abaloparatide, that is a selective activator of the parathyroid hormone type receptor. Again, for this substance, the first data show a BMD increase at all sites, significant increase. We don't have more data until now, no fracture data. What is interesting for our bone specialists, hypercalcemia is significantly lower with this analog than with the original teriparatide. So again, an interesting substance for the future. You see here the conclusions we can draw for these new drugs in phase 3 development. A, there are not many. B, they are expensive. And they're all using different signaling pathways involved in all vasomotor symptoms or in the relation of bone remodeling. So a completely new approach. So nobody knows if other substances will follow. Might be that it is simply too expensive for the companies existing today. Thank you very much.
Martin, I think I can say you not only met my expectations, you topped my expectations. There are really new information. You have questions for Professor Birkhäuser?
No.
Maybe, yes?
Martin, just a clarification. When you mentioned that some of these phytoestrogens or other available, I'm not talking about the new compounds, may be effective, you basically refer to the vasomotor effect.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas, of course, the estrogens have a long list of other effects. Does it mean that if one uses these phytoestrogens, etc., it is because the estrogens cannot be used or are contraindicated or what? Or you see an independent use?
Thank you. That has to be clarified. If you use alternative for E2, and you have the slightest suspicion that this alternative might have an estrogenic effect, you cannot use it for cancer patients. You cannot use it for other patients having contraindications against estrogens. You can use these substances for women not wanting estrogens, and there are quite a lot. So the use is limited. The second limitation, of course, you cannot replace estrogens if you look at the effect on the brain, on the heart, on the bone. That is impossible. And if you take the sources, mostly are on the American market as how do you call it, nutrition supplement. They are not on the market as a pharmaceutical substance, and therefore they are not well defined. And that makes it so difficult to make a formal statement.
But what is it about classical HRT? Will there be in future a role for these classical substances and products? Or are they, so to say, so dangerous that we need to fully go to new substances?
Not at all. Not at all. And therefore I made a first part in my lecture. I built it in yesterday evening when I have seen this statement from the American source, this strange paper. If you give a clear indication to well-selected patients, the danger is minimal. To illustrate it with data from the Women's Health Initiative, it is always said in a global way stroke risk is increased. That's completely wrong. In one paper from Zurich, you have a small chapter where she applied the Framingham Stroke Index to select the low-risk population, the population we would give estrogens. And if you take the low-risk population, the risk doesn't decrease at all. Nothing happens. So if the indication is correct and you select your patients well, the risk is not existing.
That's why I always say, with the exception of clotting problems, if there are no contraindications for the first 5 years, irrespective whether estrogen only or combined, irrespective whether sequential or continuous combined, there are no increased breast cancer risk, no increased cardiovascular risks. And I think we should also inform the patient in that way, not in the way in the first years and especially after 5 years we have increased risks. It's the other way around. After 5 years, maybe we have to consider, our Finnish guest has already departed, but we have to consider whether it makes sense after 5 years to break, to stop. Maybe this is dangerous behavior, but for the first 5 years, I think we should be aware, even with WHI, there are actually no increased risk. But after 5 years, there might be some. And maybe then, or in special cases, cancer patients, definitely we need, of course, alternatives and substitutes. It's a pity that substances such as bacidoxifene combined with CEE are not marketed. They meet the needs of the patients. They want to have a product that does not increase breast cancer risk. It even has the potential to protect against breast cancer. But actually, I really don't know why. But the Pfizer company, although approved, is not really marketing it. And it's also in Switzerland. It is approved, but it is not on the market. And I don't get a good answer why not. But let's hope and let's work on that.
Yeah. I would, for the continuation, even be a little more open. After 5 years, I think if you change to transdermal E2 and you add progesterone or dihydrogesterone, there is no risk. Nothing at all. We had the confirmation today from Finland.
Okay, so thank you, Martin, once again. We come now to the end of this conference. I would like to thank you all the speakers for their really excellent presentations. Thank you very much. I would like to thank once again Dr. Silvia Misiti and her non-profit IPSA Foundation for the excellent and generous support of this conference. Of course, I thank you for coming and for your interest, and I pass now on the word for the closing remarks to Silvia Misiti. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So don't worry, my closing remarks are just 2 minutes to thanks a lot of people. But first, I would like to remind you that all the contents of the presentation that you heard today will be reported in a volume of proceedings that you will receive. And then it will be published on the website of IPSA Foundation. So also, if you lost something today, you will find everything reported. So this is very important. Now it's just time for me to thanks, and I would like to thank a lot of people. So I'll start with you, for coming today. I thanks to all the speakers that accepted our invitation, as Bruno said. I would like to thank in special Bruno and Martin for all the great work that they have done with the program and today, so thanks. And leave me thanks all the people that work with the IPSA Foundation, that probably you don't know them, but they are around, and they took care of all the different aspects of this kind of day. So the photographer, video, people that took care of travel, catering, and all the organization. So I would like to thank them, and I hope to see you pretty soon, because aging, this kind of topic, I think is very interesting. So maybe we will be back for an update on this. So thanks and bye-bye.